Okay, does this... Yes, okay, this thing is on. This is my second recording, because I screwed with the first recording. But, so this is a rant, gonna be a rant about Shadow Slayers. I talked in the roleplay chat with some fanimators about, like, this idea, and they seemed in favor of it. And since I don't have as much free time as I used to, I figured, like, I might as well, like, rant videos don't really take a lot of work, they don't take a lot of preparation. So I have notes here as to, like, the topics that I'm going to rant on, but it's not really scripted, so you're going to hear a lot of, you're going to hear a lot of repeated things. It's not really going to be a good rant, but I feel like the Shadow Slayers role players might be interested in this rant, so I'm going to go ahead and, I don't think people in the fandom community outside of Shadow Slayers would really be interested in this, so I'm pretty likely to make it unlisted. And as you are probably already seeing, I decided I'm probably going to put Overwatch footage over this rant as for the visuals. So for this video, I plan to mention each character in the Shadow Slayers guild. Well, probably each of the villains as well. And I'll leave timestamps in the description, hopefully, if I'm not too lazy, so that you can just skip to your character if you don't want to listen to this whole rant. Yeah, it's like Shadow Slayers is just... I've just been wanting to make like another role-playing game for a long time after Shadow Slayers ended, just because I haven't really accomplished much else. I've just been thinking about Shadow Slayers all the time ever since it ended. Yeah, so this rant video, it's lazy. That's why I have enough time to do it. So it had me like, one of the things that I think about a lot is, why is Shadow Slayers like so successful? Why did it have so many posts? Why did people posting it so fast? Why were people so hyped for it? Like, it's above and beyond your average role-playing game, and it had so many pictures drawn for it. It had so many videos dedicated to it. And, like, it's just talked about so much more than any other role-playing game. Not just on Creative Studio, but any other role-playing game that I've seen. Like, and it's strange to me, because after Shadow Slayers ended, a lot of other people tried to start their own role-playing games. And it's like, they tried everything. There were so many different role-playing games with so many great ideas, but none of them ever managed to capture the hype that Shadow Slayers had. And I feel like, since everyone tried anything, the only thing that Shadow Slayers had that these other role-playing games don't is that I think it just came at the right time. I mean, like, it's not just that it came in the right time. In order for something to be successful, it has to have some merit, Like, because if something just comes at the right time, it's absolutely terrible, then people are going to start posting on it fast at first, but then they're going to realize the role-playing game's, like, not all that fun, or it's too slow, or whatever, and then they'll stop posting after a while. But Shadow Slayers consistently kept people's attention after having such a fast start. So I feel like just the thing that Shadow Slayers has over these other role-playing games, or the main thing at least, is that it just came at a time when the fandom community was kind of dying out, and people wanted something to do together, and no role-playing game before Shadow Slayers really caught people's attention to that level, I guess. I'm not doing a good job at explaining myself. But, yeah, it was that. And also, well, I did work really hard on Shadow Slayers, but a lot of these other role-playing games, I'm sure the creator would have worked hard if they got the opportunity, but they just never did, because they just didn't come at the right time, I guess. And, like, the only way, in my opinion, or the only guess I have as to how another role-playing game could even compete with Shadow Slayers at this point, is if we were to take a break from role-playing so that we could have that perfect timing of, like, oh, we haven't done a role-playing game in a while, since we haven't done it in so long, it'll be fun again if we start this back out. So I feel like taking a break from role-playing might be the only way, because to make such a successful role-playing game again, because it seems like fanimators have tried almost everything else. I mean, not absolutely everything else. Strangely, like, the fandom community hasn't tried a PvP role-playing game, which is kind of an obvious route to go. And I'm almost like, why didn't someone try this? But I don't think it's just something like PvP, or that someone hasn't tried, like, I don't know, the deadlines that I had in Shadow Slayers or anything like that. I think the timing was the biggest thing that separated Shadow Slayers from all these other role-playing games. It just kind of got lucky. It just happened to show up when people wanted something like Shadow Slayers to come along. Now that I got that long, ranty opinion out of the way, I'm going to get into... First, I'm going to start with, like, my history as a role player. I'm probably not going to rant about my history too much, because I don't think people really care about that all that much. And then I'm going to get into, like, all the various scenes in Shadow Slayers, and then I'll end it with all the different characters. I'll end it on try to end it on a high note. Save the best for last. So, with role-playing... Well, it's hard to pin down exactly when I started role-playing. Let's just skip to when I found... There's this Tales from Reform that I joined as a teenager. And on this Tales from Reform was the first play-by-post role-playing game I had ever joined. And the first role-playing game I had ever joined that wasn't just with my friends. It was with a group of online people, It wasn't just with my friends Hashim, my brother Tenchi. This was, like, my first real exposure to the world of role-playing. And what's funny is that I wouldn't necessarily say that it was immediately apparent that I was a good role player. I wouldn't say I was a good role player per se, but I was a weird role player right off the bat, because in this role playing game, it was like a monster high school setting where people would role play as all these sort of haunted creatures, I guess. Hold on a second while I close this door real quick. Okay, people would roleplay as all these sort of haunted creatures, like, it was mostly vampires and werewolves. A lot of people wanted to roleplay vampires, and one person was roleplaying, like, a human who is sort of disguising themselves in this monster high school, but all of them were, like, attractive teenagers, and they were all in the A class, except only a certain number of roleplayers could be in A class for some weird reason. So then, like, the person who joined later just went to B class, but everyone wanted their character to be the smartest character and the most attractive character. But meanwhile, while everyone was in A class and those who didn't have a choice settled for the second best B class, my character was the only one in the F class. I went all the way to the bottom because I wanted my character to be stupid. And my character was, like, really ugly. He was, like, this super buff, crazy, jacked guy. He was, like, a zombie, so he had blue skin. Similar logic to, like, Widowmaker from Overwatch, for example. So he was, like, this super buff guy with blue skin who had all these battle scars. And he was just really dumb and really mean. He had so many more flaws than all of the other characters that he, like, stood out above them a lot. And I remember one time I started setting up a rivalry between my character and this werewolf girl character. And I was like, in the tournament, I don't want it to be random. I told the host for the upcoming, like, tournament arc in this role-playing game, I don't want my opponent to be randomized like everyone else. I want to fight this character that I set up a rivalry with. And what the role-playing host, the response to that has stuck with me to this day. They said, "You're a really weird role player." Because, like, most role players, their approach to role playing is they want to just be their character. They just want to put themselves in the shoes of their character and just respond on the spot with what they feel their character would say. They want to, like, feel like they're being the character rather than my approach, which is sort of planning what the character is going to become way in advance instead of spontaneously just doing what the character would do. I felt the need to set up this rivalry that I had with this werewolf girl. I wanted to, like, build it up. I had everything, like, planned on how I would have this super crazy epic fight, but everyone else, like, that's not the philosophy that most role players have. Most role players prefer role playing games. They're very free and open, and you can just do whatever you want, and the host never says no. And you're just being your character and coming up with whatever on the fly. Just say what your character would say. Don't say whatever will lead up to whatever epic finale you're planning. So most role players don't like to plan things as much as I do. From the very start, I was against this very common philosophy when it comes to role playing of you should grant role players total freedom, because my role playing games are a lot more restrictive. It's not just freeform, do whatever you want. It has like a linear story that I don't really want people changing too much, because unlike other role players in this sort of free-form, spontaneous style, I like to have a lot more structure in my role-playing games. I like to lead it in a certain direction, plan ahead of time where I want the role-playing game to go, and I want everything to be planned so that we can have foreshadowing, so that we can have build-up, so that we can have structured character development. I don't like the common idea of how most people like to roleplay. It seems like someone with that kind of attitude who's against the common perception of roleplaying should be free and spontaneous. You would think I'm a terrible role player just from hearing that, but I don't think everyone who's necessarily against common opinions when it comes to art is wrong. I think, I stand by my opinion regardless, even though it's sort of uncommon. I don't like to give role players as much freedom as most role-playing hosts do, as much as most role-playing critics do. After forming my impression as a weird role player who feels the need to decide what's going to happen later in advance, the first one that I ever started with people online with the play-by-post format was called Hunters versus Magicians. And I would say story-wise, actually, surprisingly, I'd say if you take the story alone, is better than Shadowslayers. I feel like this story, Hunters vs. Magicians, actually had a bit more depth to it, and actually had a bit more, a bit more drama to it. But the reason why Hunters vs. Magicians was not the success that Shadowslayers was is because I got the wrong people to join this game. They were not very dedicated to it. They'd post once a day at most. The most inactive role players would post once a week. So, this role-playing game, once a day at most, that's the thing. Sometimes you get role players who just post once every 3 days, once every 4 days. So this thing moved at a snail's pace. And really what killed it was there was this one person who I asked to join the role-playing game, and I feel like I should have noticed it sooner, but that guy that I asked to join, I'm sure most of the people listening to this rant know him as the kill satellite guy. He was a total asshole, and I was forced to kick him out. That's a whole long story in itself. This is supposed to be about Shadowslayer, so I'm not going to get into that. Yeah, he and I just had very conflicting ideas, and when he was kicked out, the thing is I didn't really know how to moderate a forum that well, so even though I banned his account, he was able to just post through a guest account, and he posted this long anger rant just bashing the hell out of my role-playing style, or just mostly my role-playing game, and he said that I'm too controlling, I don't provide role players freedom to do whatever they want, certain events will happen no matter what you do anyway, so what's the point in role-playing in the game if your character doesn't really change anything. And then one thing that stuck with me that he said is, you'll never learn, do you? You'll just keep role-playing, trying to be a total control freak. Something along those lines. I just don't remember the whole thing word for word. I guess it didn't really hurt me that badly in the long run, because I can't really remember his wording. But it was something along those lines. He thought I was just the worst role player ever. Or at least both the worst role player and the worst role playing host. And his wording was incredibly harsh. There was a lot of curse words. So of course that upset me. Upset me enough to like, to the point where I didn't really want to go to sleep that night. I just stayed up all night, feeling like shit, eating yogurt and marathoning Steven Universe. And I remember saying to myself, I don't want to host a role-playing game ever again, because, Hunter vs. Magicians, just the way it turned out, made me feel like such shit. And then the game, after that Kill Satellite asshole guy was kicked out, it just slowed down like crazy and then just stopped. And I mean, my friends in the role-playing game said that the story of Hunter vs. Magicians was good, but that still wasn't really enough for me to want to start another role-playing game. At least that's how I felt at the time. But apparently, I explained my story of the role player too much now. We finally get into the part where I actually start talking about Shadow Slayers. After Hunter vs. Magicians, for some reason, I guess I just got over the Kill Satellite guy completely. Like, I sort of would laugh about it and joke about it after a while. And I changed my mind on starting a role-playing game. I decided, despite what he said, I'd start a role-playing game again anyways. It's not like Kill Satellite guy would find Shadow Slayers and ruin it for me or anything. It's funny as he said that like he'd get his revenge, but he never did. Shadow Slayers was his chance to get revenge if he ever wanted that. So Shadow Slayers, I didn't really expect a lot from it. My impression of role-playing was that every role-playing game just dies sooner or later anyways. That's just how it goes. So I was kind of prepared for that for Shadow Slayers, but I was hoping for Shadow Slayers I'd at least get through the first fight because I was excited for that. And then when I started it up, it kind of lived up to my expectation by not getting any attention. And that might be surprising to people listening to this because they're like, what, Shadow Slayers got tons of attention, got more attention than any other role-playing game. But not like on the very first day that I started it up, because when I first started Shadow Slayers, I went around asking people if they're interested. I didn't get like an overwhelming response on that. Then I started it up, and I believe like Giselle signed up immediately, and then St. Guardian signed up immediately, and then no one signed up for like a full like day or two, maybe even 3 days. I remember it being 3 days for some reason. It just didn't grab, or it grabbed people's attention, but like no one signed up for it right away. Normally with role-playing games, you get like, at least 3 people who sign up immediately. But this was just 2 people, and I was like, well, Shadow Slayers is hopeless. Like, no one's joining this thing. Maybe I shouldn't have started up a role-playing game. But then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, just tons of people started flooding in. The posts started flooding in, and that was the start of the craziest role-playing game I had ever done. But before I get into the details of that, I kind of want to talk about like the creative process behind Shadow Slayers and why it was what it is. So the basis of the idea behind Shadow Slayers is I saw like I had seen a couple other role-playing games, and I noticed that like one of the most common role-playing game themes is like a zombie apocalypse theme. People really like to just mow down hordes of zombies. There's like the zombie apocalypse role-playing type game that's really popular, and Magic High School. And the first role-playing game I did was like Magic High School, Shadow High. So I wasn't interested in doing that, so I wanted to go down the zombie apocalypse route. But I wasn't really content with just making like an ordinary zombie roleplay, that takes place in modern times and you just fight regular zombies. But I had these creatures called Fearens that I used in another role-playing game with my, when I was a teenager with my friends Hashin and Marcus and my brother Tenchi. And these creature Fearens were like sort of inspired by the Heartless from Kingdom Hearts, but they're also like these spirit animals that are formed from the darkness of people's hearts. Wow, that sounds really cheesy. They're very similar to Heartless, basically, but I was like, if I want a zombie-style roleplay, these creatures are perfect. They're sort of like a mix of both zombies and Heartless. And so, after deciding that I wanted the villains to be Fearens, I something made me decide that I wanted it to take place in like a medieval fantasy realm. I guess because like medieval fantasy, you typically have your JRPG roles, and that would be like a nice little feature to have in Shadow Slayer. So you could have your healers, you could have your magicians, you could have your swordsmen and your archers and all that. So I felt like a combination of the common zombie apocalypse theme with a medieval setting would make for a fun role playing game in general. So that was like, and then I already had the story called Come of the Thief that took place on this planet that I made up called Ignis, and so I was like, okay, that's perfect. I'll just use like the world of Come of the Thief for this zombie apocalypse style role playing game. That's how that's how I came up with that idea. And like, since it was taking place in the world of Come of the Thief, I decided I could just reuse pre-made characters for this role playing game, since it's taking place in like a world that I already made up for a different story. So of course Tairaga would be in it because he's very directly linked to Come of the Thief. Of course Sandor would be in it because he's from Come of the Thief as well. Valdus was sort of just thrown in there because the initial premise of just like Fearens destroyed the world is like nothing, and I was like, oh, I feel like I would add a little bit of mystery and intrigue to this, so I decided to just make a chosen one that dies, just to like make it feel especially hopeless, because like, oh no, the chosen one's dead. And also like, since no one knows how he died, that could create a little bit of mystery that could make people a little bit more interested in Shadow Slayer. So that's really the only reason why Valdus exists. And then I quickly came up with the idea that like Valdus would be the villain all along. That was kind of an obvious way to go with that character, because a lot of people thought of it. Like, a lot of people predicted that Valdus would be the final boss, or at least one of the villains. And then the idea behind Fearos was very Attack on Titan inspired. The world of Come of the Thief itself is something that I made up as a kid. It's very Naruto inspired, as a lot of people listening to this probably already knew. So there was a number of inspirations, but the zombie apocalypse theme is sort of what started all, sort of launched the whole idea. And I thought about Shadow Slayers and what exactly I wanted the story to be for like a week before I actually started the role-playing game. Now I'll get into like I'll go into the individual events that happened within Shadow Slayers and just say my thoughts on them, things I just want to say about them, I guess. So back to when Shadow Slayers first started, there was a ton of posts. It was really overwhelming at first. I couldn't even keep up with everything. Or I could at first, but I was like, I don't know how long I'll be able to keep up with this without going crazy. And I had planned to do like a training session because I thought people would be more interested to show off their characters' powers than they would be in interactions. But I was wrong. The role players in Shadow Slayers really wanted to make their characters just talk to each other, which I found strange. So I kind of regret doing the training sessions as a whole, since it turned out to be like unnecessary. And also like more than half the characters weren't even in on the training session. So for the training session, also one funny thing that I've always wanted to mention about the training sessions that I don't feel like I ever did is that I really just wanted Enoch to fight Gaynor, and I wanted Kama to fight Daryn. But I had to make everyone paired up, because this is a role-playing game. You can't just leave people out like that. You have to find a way to involve everyone. So everyone had to be paired up. And I forgot about Rylan because, at this point the game just started. I didn't remember everyone's characters that well. Even toward the end of the game. There's so many characters that I forget some of them sometimes. So then I edited the post to replace Kama and had Rylan fight Daryn instead. So the original intention actually was to have Kama fight Daryn. So if I were to rewrite Shadow Slayers as like a comic or an anime or whatever, I would want the adaptation to be a bit more focused. I just wanted Enoch versus Gaynor and Kama versus Daryn. Like, even Kama and Enoch could be one team and Gaynor and Daryn could be another team. It could have been like a team fight too, but that's what I wanted, because those four characters were really sort of the center of the conflict. It was like Gaynor and Daryn shit-talking everyone. Then Enoch is like the adult, not quote unquote, he's an adult. He's the adult who's arguing with them. And then like, Kama's the one who decides, okay, show your mettle, show how tough you are. The thing is, because Trippett wanted Daryn to lose the training session match, but the funny thing is, Trevor just made his character lose first. They were both trying to lose. I found that really funny, but Trippett just couldn't make her character lose fast enough. From reading it, I feel like it didn't necessarily turn out how they wanted it to. It didn't really stick out as an epic fight to them. That's what I feel like. I mean, it wasn't a bad fight, It was well written, I guess. It was a good fight. God, I'm not good with words. But yeah, Kama versus Daryn was what I really wanted because, Trippett wanted Daryn to lose, and I would want Kama to win to show that Kama sort of deserves to be the leader of the guild because he's strong, and because it would make sense narratively for Kama to be the one to sort of put Daryn in her place, you know what I mean? And I feel like that's what Trippett wanted too. Trippett wanted Daryn to be knocked down a peg, and that's why Trippett wanted Daryn to lose. So narratively, Kama versus Daryn just would have worked out so much better. It also could have cemented the rivalry between Kama and Daryn, because they're both kind of mean and angry a lot of the time, and they're both they argue a lot. So the fight was going to start out with Kama sort of making it abundantly clear that Kama's really old. He'd have back problems, and he'd be like, "Oh, I let me fix my back. Just hold on a second." And then Daryn would look at Kama and be like, "This guy really fight? He seems a bit too old. His back's all he has to fix his back. This is stupid. Why am I doing this? Why am I fighting an old man?" And then I wanted, after Kama was done fixing his back, he'd just suddenly vanish because he's so fast that he just zooms behind Daryn all of a sudden and catches her off guard. I thought that would have been a really cool moment, and Kama versus Daryn, I think would have been. They're also both swordsmen, so it would have been easier to play out how the fight would go. Daryn wouldn't have ended up cutting Rylan's leg, causing Rylan to lose a leg. And then in the future. But yeah, so that's Kama versus Daryn is something that I wanted. But I feel like the training sessions still turned out great the way they were. I still really enjoyed Daryn versus Rylan. But after that went down, it was one time when I was sleeping, when Ooro was joined into the game, where there were so many posts while I was sleeping that I was like, okay, there has to be a post limit now. You can only post 10 times per day. And 10 times per day is ridiculous, because remember, Hunters vs. Magicians was people would post maximum once per day. So I felt maybe I should make the post limit 5 times per day. But 10 times seemed to work for people. It turned out well in the end. But what's funny is that people thought I'd be upset seeing so many posts when I woke back up. But since there was nothing to be fixed, I was like, no, I'm happy. As long as I don't have to do anything. You guys can post while I'm sleeping, just as long as there are no complaints, as long as there's no drama while I'm sleeping, as long as there's nothing that I have to fix, then I'm cool. I'll just fall behind. I don't care. Yeah, while these posts were going by too fast, and hosting this roleplay was a nightmare for me because the game was so fast and there were so many people to manage, and I had to constantly pay attention to Shadow Slayers. I decided to start the first battle, and what's funny is that, as I said earlier in the rant, this was meant to be a spin-off of a zombie apocalypse roleplay, and in a zombie apocalypse game, you'd typically just slaughter zombies every post left and right. You'd slaughter 3 zombies one post, then 5 zombies the next post, and then 1 zombie the next post. Because these are regular enemies that you just sort of dispose of to show off your combat ability. But surprisingly, I guess it's because everyone in Shadowslayers was a writer, that they wanted their character to be more of an underdog than that. So nearly everyone, right off the bat, struggled to beat one enemy. Like, these regular enemies called Fearens, they they made the characters just get their asses kicked by one of them at a time, and it's just like, wow, these guys are weak. I mean, it made the Fearens seem strong, I guess. That kind of worked in my favor, and I did actually like that a lot. It's how much the Shadowslayers struggled to win every fight is like one of the best things about Shadowslayers. This actually turned out to be great, but it's just funny because I really wasn't expecting it. I was ready for like some really overpowered characters who just create these massive explosions to defeat like hundreds of Fearens for posts. But there was even like a complaint about someone's character being overpowered because they defeated 3 Fearens in one pose, and I'm like, that's just 3 Fearens. Like these are like, you know, the disposable like little worthless soldiers that you're supposed to defeat like 5 of them at a time, and someone's saying that someone else's character is really powerful defeating 3, and I'm like, that's not powerful. Your characters are just weak as shit. But yeah, that fight, despite me not being very active during a lot of that fight, it still turned out well. People had a lot of fun, and I think a lot of what made it work is that I gave each of the initial 4 Fearens so many abilities and so many weaknesses, and the fact that I encouraged all the role players to take on like team-oriented roles sort of created this more strategic, team-oriented sort of like, you know, you take care of that enemy, I take care of this enemy, than most role-playing games, especially more than most zombie apocalypse role-playing games where you're just mowing them down with a chainsaw. This was a lot more clever than that. So I was really happy with, you know, how fighting in Shadowslayers turned out. And I think that's one of the things that made Shadowslayers successful, one of many little things. Then, you know, after they took forever to defeat like 10 Fearens because the Shadowslayers were so weak, and then I introduced like this boss character named Fearos, who was like 100 times bigger than all the other Fearens. Everyone panicked because they were like, how are we supposed to beat this boss character named Fearos? Like, it's like half the size of the Colossal Titan from Attack on Titan. He's like absolutely massive. And these characters are so weak compared to the regular Fearen that it seemed hopeless initially, and I actually had to like calm people down. I remember like Arenia said that she paced in the room back and forth panicking when she first saw that Fearos showed up, and like Norimo had like a bad dream about being a toilet crying about it or something like that. Like people were genuinely panicked about Fearos. It was the craziest reaction. But I feel like getting that kind of reaction people is one of my strongest strengths as a role-playing host, like creating these really intimidating, super powerful enemies. It's a strength that's like very shonen anime inspired. So that was pretty much the highlight of Shadowslayers at that point. People were freaking out about it. They were talking about it all over Creative Studio Forum. And the funny thing is, the Shadowslayers, originally when I made up the initial story behind the Shadowslayers, they were supposed to lose to Fearos. So I think most people listening to this rant already know this. Fearos, you know, was supposed to be beating the hell out of them, and then 2 more legendary Fearens were supposed to show up, and then Kama's just like, you know, Fearos already seemed impossible as it is. Now these 2 other legendary Fearens show up. We gotta retreat. The 2 other legendary Fearens were going to be Vastibon and like some new Fearen. It wasn't going to be Necrosis, surprisingly. But anyways, whatever. The Necrosis was added in later, and I'm not going to get into why. But, yeah, so 2 more Fearens were supposed to show up. Kama decides that it's hopeless and tells the Shadowslayers to run away. So they're supposed to start retreating, and then there's going to be like this almost sort of cutscene-esque post where Celty drops Axie by accident, or like Axie falls behind for some reason, and then Kama was going to sacrifice himself to save Axie, and then the story was pretty much going to take a much darker direction than it did from that point on. But Shadowslayers was already so, like, as I said, people panicked about Fearos as it was. Like, it was already really dark for their tastes as it is. So, like, I had paced back and forth because I was thinking, like, maybe they should beat Fearos, maybe they should have them win. And because the role players wanted their characters to beat Fearos so badly, they were panicking so much as it was about how powerful this enemy is. So after like a lot of thinking, and I asked Shribbit about it in private, and I asked Casserole about it in private, and I just wasn't sure. I just had such a hard time deciding whether or not I want the Shadowslayers to win against Fearos, and whether or not I want Kama to live. And I decided, eventually, okay, fine, I'll have the Shadowslayers win this fight. So what's funny is that like the Shadowslayers, they barely won. I was on the verge of making them lose, but then I changed my mind at the last minute. And so I decided to have Kama live, and Kama just kind of lived throughout the rest of the role-playing game, because I just didn't feel like there was a need to kill him off. The game's already plenty dramatic and plenty successful as it was without that. And there was already plenty of death scenes without that as well. So now we move on to the segment where I talk about after the Fearos fight. This is where I started to get more into Shadowslayers. I started to enjoy myself more, because I got used to the post raid. I learned to just, when I had to, I'd just post really spontaneously. I had all sorts of like bad writing and spelling mistakes and whatever, but I didn't care. Like, that's what I had to do to keep up with the insane pacing of this role-playing game. People also started to understand Kama's character a lot more. I think it was because of Kama's like fear and chill race with Daryn that people started to like him more as a character. And he actually, like early on, people didn't really talk about Kama much, but starting at that point, people started like really liking his character. People started showing a lot of appreciation for his character. Like Tairaga was briefly mentioned once in Kama's profile, and then Kama mentioned him once during the campfire scene, and that was it. This is just like, he's a king, he's evil, Kama beat him 50 years ago, and that's it. That's all it's ever mentioned of this character, Tairaga, before he shows up. And yet, people remembered him, which surprised me, and people immediately figured out that he would be the next villain once I mentioned that it's, the next villain is probably someone from 50 years ago. So that just shows how much people thought about Shadowslayers and how much of the role players were into it. The fact that they remembered Tairaga so easily, it was surprising to me. I didn't expect people to guess that. I didn't expect people to remember him. And I feel like people might even remember like Galax, Senna, and Hikaku and their mentions in Shadowslayers, because every post that I made in that role-playing game just seemed to stick with them. So then the Tairaga fight happened, and as soon as Tairaga showed up, people were immediately like really into his character, which kind of surprised me. But after hearing them explain it, it kind of started to make more sense to me, because funny thing is, people expected Tairaga to be like a fat, ugly, stupid king. Like, they expected him to be the stereotypical guy with a beard, wearing a crown, he's really fat, and he wears like normal medieval robes. But what they got is like this, cool looking, spiky haired, like powerful swordsman. He was so much more intimidating and so much more of a final boss, I guess. That's not a good description. He was so much tougher than they were expecting. And like cooler, He's not a stereotypical fat crowned king. So that's part of the reason why people liked him so much. And I think also because he was the first humanoid Fearen to ever show up. So he created a lot of intrigue, I guess. Out of all the villains, Tairaga got the most fan art because he was the first villain who could really talk. He wasn't like the other Fearens up until that point. And I thought, when I made Valdus, I thought Valdus was the better character, because Tairaga is a character that I started making when I was 11, and he's sort of bogged down by the ideas that I made when I was 11, or 11? I might have been younger than that. I made him in elementary school, and his hairstyle is just a ripoff of Kakashi from Naruto, and his personality, the initial idea behind it is not that creative. He's just pure evil. He's just evil, the character, there's no redeeming qualities about him. So I found it strange that he was the favorite and that people liked him so much. When I thought about him, even though he's a little bit more developed than I gave him credit for, because when he talks like a little bit flamboyantly, and like he kind of shows like a sense of humor. So he was a little bit more developed than I gave him credit for when thinking about it. But also, I just feel like he works really well as a role-playing villain. Like, specifically for that medium role-playing. Because the thing is, his combat abilities sort of force you to be strategic, because he can read your mind. He can read your mind if you're within his eyesight. So you have to, like, figure out a way to stay out of his line of vision. And another thing that makes him work so well is that he can use illusion, so he can use all sorts of strategies himself. It's easy to come up with like tricky attacks when you have an illusionist. And also his instant regeneration powers make it so that even if some role player pulls out some stupidly overpowered attacks, I can just make him regenerate. Not only from a combat standpoint did he work well as a role-playing villain, but from both a personality and history standpoint, because I'll start with the history. It's because that he, like, caused genocide among non-human races 50 years ago that it made it easy for role players to incorporate him into their backstory. So, like, all of the elf role players, the people who were role playing as elves, would, like, be like, oh man, Tairaga killed my whole family. Now I want to fight him. And they would, like, talk to Tairaga about, you know, the wicked things he had done 50 years ago. So it worked so well to get Tairaga involved in their character's character arc. And the same with Celty, since Tairaga was like the main humanoid Fearen of Shadow Slayers, and Celty sort of had a backstory that would require humanoid Fearen. Yeah, so Tairaga just... the stars aligned for Tairaga, and he became the favorite among the villains of Shadow Slayers, and his fight became the favorite fight among all of the battles in Shadow Slayers, because he just happened to make a really good roleplay villain. And there was also just a lot that went down in that fight. A lot of death scenes happened in that fight in particular. And Tairaga also summoned 2 legendary Fearens just to make the fight more ridiculous and more difficult. Which also caused a similar panic to when Fearos showed up, because it's not only just one legendary Fearen like Fearos, now it's 2 of them plus Tairaga, made for quite a crazy battle. But unfortunately, during this battle... my throat's killing me now. During this battle, I kind of had to put the role-playing game on hiatus, because at this point, I was so focused on Shadow Slayers that I sort of neglected my job, and it seemed like I was going to be in huge trouble and that I'd have to start working a lot more from that point on. But even though the next day I found out that, like, the issue was sort of resolved the next day, and I was like, oh, so I didn't even have to put Shadow Slayers on hiatus. Like, I was being really dramatic about it when I thought I'd have to put it on hiatus, but the next day it didn't have to be on hiatus, but it's too late because I already put it on hiatus. And I was like, so should I just, like, put it off of hiatus once I get back home? But I decided not to, because, like, I was just really exhausted from Shadow Slayers, and there were so many things I wanted to do while Shadow Slayers was going on. And since it was on hiatus, I was like, okay, maybe I'll take this break to, like, do all the things that I wanted to do. And that was, like, the most relaxing week of my life. The week off of Shadow Slayers. Oh, man, I just, like... it was a much-needed break. I got so many things I wanted to do out of the way. I felt so much more calm, and I could just get my life together during that week. But I decided to start Shadow Slayers back up after only a week, because my experience is that if you leave a role-playing game on hiatus for too long, it ends up dying out. Like, even leaving it on a week hiatus was risky for Shadow Slayers, because even after it came off of hiatus, people just weren't as hyped for Shadow Slayers anymore. So, like, I would never recommend that someone put the role-playing game on hiatus, even if they think they'll be busy for a couple days. Just let people post while you're gone, anyways, and then you can just come back to it when you have the time to do so. I think that's usually the route you want to go down. Like, that hiatus could have killed Shadow Slayers, but fortunately everyone was still willing to get back into it, and it worked out favorably for a lot of other people as well. They were so addicted to this role-playing game that once it went on hiatus, they were able to get their lives back together as well. Vastibon was summoned during the Tairaga fight, and I thought people would be more excited for Vastibon because he was in Creative Gakuin, but apparently not. Vastibon, people didn't seem crazy about fighting him. They all still kept attacking Tairaga. And then when Necrosis came in, I'm like, okay, I have to, like, tell people who to attack, because if I don't, then everyone will just keep attacking Tairaga, because everyone's, like, really into Tairaga. You know, he's the favorite villain. So, well, I feel like some people might have attacked Necrosis, because he was a cool villain, too. But I decided, anyways, to just tell them who to attack who. And the reason why Necrosis was included in Shadow Slayers instead of a new Fearen, because as I said earlier, I was going to include another Fearen instead of Necrosis, but it's because Vastibon was originally from my first hosted play-by post role-playing game called Hunters vs. Magicians, and Necrosis was also from Hunters vs. Magicians, so I thought it'd be like more fun to bring in Necrosis along with Vastibon. It was just kind of like a funny Easter egg idea that I wanted to throw in there. And Necrosis was Tenchi's character, but Tenchi seemed like he was all up for, you know, being Necrosis for me, helping my role-playing game out by doing the Necrosis post, and actually helped me out a lot, because, you know, then I didn't have to pay attention to the Necrosis posts. I didn't have to post as much, because he was being one of the villains. That made it a lot more manageable. And actually, I'm really glad that I included Necrosis, because, like, not only was he a cool character, but also, like, that was kind of the highlight of the role-playing game for Tenchi. He enjoyed Necrosis fight a lot. So, toward the end of the fight, once again, I was considering having Kama die, but at this point, people grew really attached to Kama as a character, and people were so, like, emotional about Shadow Slayers that I feel like they might have been genuinely upset if I killed him off. Like, they would have been, you know, like, they wouldn't have enjoyed it. It's just like, this is too sad. I don't like this. So I wanted the dramatic effect of him dying, but I didn't want him to be, like, permanently gone, because role players won't like that. So I tried to find, like, an in-between of, like, how can I get this tragedy to happen but have them win at the same time? And so my solution was a near-death scene. I'd make it seem like Kama was going to die at first in order to get that, like, dramatic reaction, and then I'd have him, like, get back up and win in order to have that triumphant victory. And, like, I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to come up with a fight ending that topped Fearos, because Fearos had a really, like, dramatic and satisfying end, and I was like, this Tairaga fight's going to be lame in comparison because it's not going to end as well. But Kama getting back up and, like, you know, on the verge of death and beating his old rival in this dramatic fashion, it actually managed to be just as awesome as the Fearos fight ending. And I was super satisfied with the solution that I came up with the near-death scene. It really helped that scene to be an impactful scene. So yeah, that idea. I just found that funny. It's like, I want him to die, but I want him to win at the same time. So it's just like, why not both? So after that, they went to the castle. I think the castle, like, it worked really well thematically. I mean, also because, like, you know, a lot of the role players said, these characters, they need a break. Like, they've been hanging out outside in wastelands, and they've been, like, having a shit life. But the castle was, like, a nice, luxurious break from all of that the main characters really needed. And I also like how there's sort of a sense of progress with the places that they stay in and the enemies that they defeat. It sort of gives you the sense of the rising to the top, because first they start out at just an abandoned church, just one small building in the middle of nowhere, and then they go to a town, they got, like, you know, several buildings, and they got a little campfire. It's a bit more like the place where they hang out after beating Fearos is a bit nicer, and then the castle is even nicer than the campfire. So it's like, it was nice. It sort of created, I don't know, I thought it was cool that the Shadow Slayers, their situation was getting better and better. There was, like, even though the fights were getting harder, that sort of kept up the hope in them, I guess. It kept up their spirits a little bit. Next, what happened was the beginning of the final battle against Valdus. I liked how Valdus was like sort of, to me, he was almost a parody of a Mary Sue. Like, he was perfect in any way, but he was almost like the Mary Sue gone wrong. Like, everyone treated him like he was perfect. They told him he was always right, and he thought, oh, since everything I do is right, why don't I do something drastic? Since I'm the chosen one, I can create world peace. If I were to really try at it, and nothing I do is morally wrong, so whatever I think will work, I'll just go for it. So his ego essentially, like, inflated to the point where he came up with a crazy Fearen plan. And I also like how people already predicted that Valdus would probably be the final boss, but they expected it to be like possessed Valdus or Fearen Valdus. They expected him not to be himself. But the idea that like this evil thing that he did, and he actually thought he was right, and he wasn't possessed or anything, people didn't expect that part. And I felt like that's what made Valdus's initial introduction. That's the only thing that made Valdus's initial introduction interesting or surprising at all, really, because if he was just Fearen Valdus, everyone would have just seen it coming, and it wouldn't have been exciting. And Valdus sort of, it was kind of a bad thing to do, but like Valdus explained the whole plan of why everything in Shadowslayers was happening. Like his info dump, it was like the longest post I made in Shadowslayers. His info dump was like the whole story of Shadowslayers right there in one post. That was kind of a bad thing to do. Maybe I should have, like, I don't know, given a bit more hints as the game went along so that people wouldn't have been dumped with all that information at once. A lot of the people wanted to fight the humanoid Fearens that they made, but for me, like, the humanoid Fearen fights were too long. Like, I wanted to hurry it up. That's kind of an issue with PvP, is that if one role player, like, finishes their PvP fight, then other role players are still doing theirs. You just kind of have to wait for them. So I was like rushing people to finish that up so that the people who finished their fights faster wouldn't start to get impatient. Because I didn't want the role-playing game to die, of course. I think pacing is super important for a role-playing game. So, keep it going fast so that people don't get bored, but not too fast. The only characters who were fighting Valdus were Kama, Alroth, and Galystris. Like, it was just those three fighting Valdus at first. And they were able to, like, hold Valdus back by themselves. Valdus just really, he didn't come off as that strong, because, Tairaga had an instant regeneration, so he was, like, invincible until he got rid of his magic, so he was, like, impossible to kill, and he also had mind reading, which is overpowered as all hell. Fearos, also came before Valdus, and he had this, like, magic shield that blocked every single attack, and he was massive. And Valdus, he seems so much weaker than them. Like, he could just throw big swords around. And, like, people were like, Valdus, he seems too easy to be the final boss. Like, we're just fighting these humanoid Fearens, and hardly anyone's dealing with Valdus. And as soon as they all start getting up on Valdus, he's just defeated immediately. And it's like, this seems too easy. And then, oh boy, this was one of my favorite parts of the role-playing game. Once Valdus was defeated, and, like, the black ooze started coming out of his eyes, and, like, the black ooze started coming out of his mouth. This might be my favorite part of Shadowslayers, because this is when the panic really induced. Because he was just, like, floating up all creepily, and there was, like, this creepy aura, and there was all these souls screaming for help that they could hear in the distance. And, like, literally half the reason why I had current objective as a system, because the thing is, current objective wasn't really necessary, because what most role-playing hosts will do is they'll just introduce all of the role-playing game rules from the start. But I would like have this current objective thing, which would introduce various rules throughout the game. Half the reason was so that I wouldn't overwhelm people with rules from the start, but also just for this one scene where I could make the current objective just a bunch of question marks, just to, like, freak the role players out, like, oh no, what do we do? What's happening? It created this sort of mysterious, it's scary because you don't know what's going to happen kind of feel. It was very inspired by Flowey from Undertale, I mean, sorry to spoil Undertale, but like, you know, if you're interested in Undertale, you would have played it by now. But anyways, Flowey like gets a god mode in Undertale, and everything turns pitch black, and you just hear this creepy music, and you know he's just saying all these like creepy things, and it like that scene sort of was so creepy and so intimidating because you're like, oh god, like a god's about to come out, like shit's really gonna hit the fan now. And that was the feeling that I wanted to capture with this, like, scene where Valdus was about to summon Sandor. It was so creepy and weird, but that's what made Sandor so intimidating when he finally showed up. So the Sandor fight, oh man, Sandor fight was something, but I have written in my notes here that I'm going to save that for last, because I want the end of the Shadowslayer story to be the end of the rant. So for this part of the rant, this is such a bad transition, but for this part of the rant, now I'm going to get into all the individual characters before I get into the end of Shadowslayers. So the first character, I'm going to go in order of when they showed up, just to like, I did that to make sure that I got everyone. So the first character show up, obviously, was my character, because I started the role-playing game, and I just posted my character's profile as soon as I started the game up. I'm not going to say a whole lot about my character, because, like, if I said everything that I had to say about Kama, then I could just sit here for, like, an hour. This rant's already long enough as it is. But there are a few things that I want to say about Kama regarding Shadowslayers that I find interesting. One thing is that I'm glad that I made Kama, like, an old man in this role-playing game, and that I essentially made this a sequel to the story of Kama the Thief, because I just find that interesting, and I feel like that's part of what caused him to not be a conventional old man, since he wasn't originally built to be an old man. That just sort of made him like less wise and more angry than your stereotypical old man leader character. I found to be like one of the most interesting parts of the character in Shadowslayers. The most interesting part of his character, I think, was how his anger issues became a genuine weakness in the fight against Tairaga, but I'm not going to get into that. But having him, like, in the role-playing game unintentionally worked as, like, an amazing advertisement for my next fanime, Kama the Thief, or I might not ever make that fanime, because, oh boy, is progress slow on that thing. But, and another one of Kama's standout moments besides, like, the anger thing against Tairaga, and that being like a genuine weakness, is when he gave his headband to Mimisko, because the reason why that's a big deal is because Kama has been a character of mine, you know, since I was in elementary school. He's been like my main OC throughout pretty much my entire life. Like every time I'd play a video game where I can make a character, I'd always make Kama, because I don't know, I just chose him as my main character. I grew really attached to the character. And that green headband has always been like a weird part of his character design ever since he was made. Like, the green stands out from the rest of his black outfit. It's really weird that he has a green headband. So I decided that, like, you know, the reason why he wears such an unfitting headband is for sentimental purposes, not for fashion purposes, because if he wanted the headband that matched his outfit, he would wear a black headband, because he wears all black. But it's like a bright green headband that doesn't match his character design. And so, like, since that had always been a part of his character design, it's crazy to think that, like, I got rid of that part of his character and gave that to someone else's character. Like, such a big part of my childhood is now passed on to someone else's character. It's just kind of a weird just a weird thought, but that's sort of what made Kama passing out his headband to Mimisko such a big deal. And same with, like, the dagger. Kama didn't always, like, he didn't always have two swords, but he always had that dagger since I was a kid, and him giving that dagger to Osseus is also, like, a really big deal. It would be like it would be like if Naruto gave his headband to Luffy in, like, some sort of canon crossover story, you know? It'd be like someone giving away their childhood, essentially, to another person's character. It's such a... I don't know, I thought it was cool. That's all I have to say about that. Wow, I talked about Kama more than I thought I would. So, now on to the Mimisko portion of the rant. I'm going to say the elephant in the room about Mimisko. The most obvious thing to point out about her character that's great is her character growth. Everyone mentions how Mimisko grows as a character all the time. She's like, according to Giselle, one of the most, possibly the most well-developed character that Giselle had ever made, because Mimisko very noticeably starts out as a very wimpy character, and as the story goes on, very gradually, she gets tougher and tougher until she reached that point where she overcame Sandor. She started out as like the wimpiest member of the Shadow Slayers, and came out like a legend, essentially. What's funny is that, like, when rereading Shadow Slayers, I was really annoyed with Mimisko constantly, like, talking about her mom. I was like, shut up about your mom. Like, your mom's, like, just stop it. Like, Mama, I found a guild. Mama, look, I found Kama. There's Mama. Help me. I'm fighting Fearos. Mama this, Mama that. But what's interesting is that worked so well for her character in the long run, because she stopped mentioning her mom in those posts. It's like you can actually see in the dialogue of Mimisko her becoming more independent as a character, her becoming so much, tougher, overcoming the fear. When she first fights Fearos, she's crying like a baby and she doesn't want to fight, and then Enoch like knocks some sense into her, and then in the next fight against Vastbon, she's toughened up. Not against Vastbon, she fought against Necrosis. What am I saying? Yeah, and then for the final fight, I'll probably just repeat this at the end of the rant anyways. So in the final fight, Sandor's final attack worked so well for not only Mimisko's character arc, but the theme of the whole roleplay, where he sprayed this gas that causes an unfathomable amount of fear and anxiety. And to me, I thought that was so amazing, because, to shoot that kind of attack at Mimisko, who suffered in the past so much, character so well. And as I said, the theme of the role-playing game, because the theme of the role-playing game is said by Kama over and over again about overcoming your past, overcoming your weaknesses, trying again and again to become a hero. And that's essentially what Mimisko does, and that's why Mimisko worked so well as the one who does the final blow on Sandor. And I decided from the very beginning of the role-playing game, or really early on in the role-playing game, that she would be the one to do the final blow on Sandor. Not just because she's an underdog character, but also partially because Giselle was the first to post, and she was really dedicated to the role-playing game. But one of the main reasons also is that early on in the role-playing game, there were so many fire mages. Obviously, Kama uses fire, Gaynor used fire, Odessa could use fire, and Rylan eventually learned to use fire. But what's funny is that Rylan, Gaynor, and Odessa all died during the Tairaga fight. All three of those fire users died at once, and I was like, shit, there goes my plan of coming up with this crazy fire team attack at the end of Shadow Slayers. But I mean, still by the end of Shadow Slayers, a lot of characters could use fire, so my plan still worked, fortunately for me. But yeah, having Mimisko alone do the final blow was questionable, but I don't necessarily regret the decision. I bet a lot of people who are more critical of roleplay hosts would have said that was an insanely risky and questionable move to let one person get the final blow, but I felt like that worked amazingly narratively. I guess her growth as a character isn't the only thing I should say about her. Another thing that I like about Mimisko is also that she was a very friendly character who would talk to everyone. A lot of characters sort of had a tendency to stick to a clique, but not Mimisko. She'd talk to the characters who'd sort of get ignored by the other role players a lot. She talked to Nicolas. She talked to Gremlon. Her character really helped everyone get involved, and that's something that I appreciated a lot. And she was a character that, I think all of the role players liked, and all the role playing characters sort of liked her because she was a nice person. Her only real flaw was, or her main flaw was that, she was kind of on the wimpy side, which she eventually overcame. So now to talk about Fallen. My throat is dying at this point, but I've only gotten up to Fallen. Fallen, besides Nicolas, who didn't really post a lot, Fallen was like the most notably awkward character, especially since he stutter. I feel like he was supposed to be a bit awkward. He at least stuttered, but he seemed to stop stuttering later on. But I kind of liked that about him, that he wasn't obnoxious like a lot of the other Shadowslayers are. And his character was it came off as kind of smart and wise for his age. He was a cool character. And I think maybe what might be my favorite thing about Fallen is that he was he was a clever fighter, and his moveset was really creative. He had all these sorts of gems with these weird powers, and he had that dust that would move the space around him. I could tell that Zengardian tried to make Fallen really interesting from a combat perspective, and how he helped slow the mountain down and the fight against Sandor, and he's got all these. I think he had a bunch of elemental arrows. He had a lot of attacks, but Fallen would never use just an obvious arrow attack, oh, this arrow can shoot farther, this arrow can, or I can shoot multiple arrows. He'd always do something sort of strategic and clever. That's something I really liked about Fallen. And Fallen really had a great character moment after Celty essentially caused the guild to fall apart in the castle. The whole drama over Oxy being a Fearen and Celty being a witch, or Clarissa being a witch in Celty's body, technically. And Fallen was had a really nice speech that he said to Enoch, and I think Daryn as well. That was just really well written and motivational. I don't know, that scene was just well written, and it was dramatic, and it was cool. Fallen didn't really have a lot of posts, but among the ones that he did have, that one was kind of a standout one to me. Now on to Daryn. Thing about Daryn is that upon first glance, and if I were to tell you everything that Daryn did, Daryn would just kind of seem like a background character, because Daryn never really has any standout moments, but there were so many role players in the role-playing game, and Tribute, that Tribute was willing to sort of take the backseat and not try to hog the spotlight. Tribute was very she almost seemed to enjoy being a side character, which is something that I sort of appreciated. It made things easier for me, the fact that Tribute didn't need to feel the need to hog attention. But at the same time, despite that, I don't mean side character in a bad way, because Daryn was a really likable character. I liked Daryn a lot, because Daryn, the Daryn posts were always a lot of fun to read. You could say that that's a result of Strippet's writing, but I genuinely feel like Daryn is a likable character, and everything Daryn does has some excitement and some purpose to it. And Daryn's also probably one of the funniest characters in Shadowslayers. She has a lot of funny moments, with the Shell Fearen writing, and the food fight with Kama, and throwing rocks at Kama. I'm noticing a pattern here. They're all conflicts with Kama, but I feel her character chemistry with Kama is great. The fact that Kama's so competitive and that she gets so angry with Kama being competitive, and so it escalates into these goofy scenarios that get out of control. Yeah, and how Daryn sort of starts out as an asshole, but sort of gradually opens up to the Shadowslayers and grows connected to them and learns to be nicer to them. Her character is also well developed. And one moment of Daryn's that I liked a lot is when Daryn was hit by a mage Fearen during the Tairaga fight, and you saw her worst fear was being alone, because she grew so attached to the Shadowslayers that having them all suddenly vanish is like, you know, what would freak her out more than anything. I thought that was like a really great character moment. It showed that Daryn had a lot of depth to her. More depth than just being an asshole. And I also liked that post where like Daryn sort of just wandered off into the forest. And I think she like saw her dad's helmet or something. I remember it being a really good post, but for some reason I don't remember the details of that post very well. Her conflict with her dad was also like a really great character trait that I liked a lot. Daryn also had a lot of good chemistry with Enoch, because like Daryn would often do like a lot of crazy things, and you'd see like Enoch sort of snickering in the back about the crazy things that Daryn does, and he'd like say like smart, snarky things towards Daryn. So like Daryn and Enoch ending up together as a couple by the end of the story. It worked. It was good. I liked it and all that. Yeah, good. Oh, my throat is killing me. This rant is so fucking long. There's so much to say about Shadow Slayers. Now I'm gonna talk like Filthy Frank. I can't even do the Filthy Frank voice anymore because my throat is dying so much. Okay, I'm not gonna do the Filthy Frank voice from now on. Gonna talk about Rylan. So, Rylan. Funny thing about Rylan is that he was my favorite character at the beginning of the role-playing game. And that's largely because he had such exaggerated reactions to everything that happened in Shadow Slayers that, like, it made things a lot of fun for me, and it made, like, it made every event in Shadow Slayers feel so impactful and dramatic. Like, you know, him losing a leg in the first Fearens fight is like, oh man, like, thank you, Rylan, for losing a leg. That made these Fearens so intimidating. And like how Rylan would, like, you know, he's so scared and he was going absolutely insane when he first saw Fearos, and that helped Fearos so much to cement himself as like this monster that causes panic to everyone in the Shadow Slayers Guild. And he was like the most excited when Fearos was first defeated. And he was like, I can't believe that we just beat a legendary Fearen. Like, his sort of crazy reaction to everything and all the drama that he caused was so great for me as a role-playing host. It felt like everything that I was posting had impact because of his reaction to all of it. So that's why I liked Rylan so much as a character in the beginning. And also because Rylan showed an appreciation for the world that I built. You know, he praised the three gods that I came up with. So I also liked that a lot about his character. He fit in to the world of Ignis really well. And he also had his moment when he almost, well, for me at least, one moment that I liked a lot is when he almost left the Shadow Slayers Guild. Again, I guess this ties back to how much this benefited me, but like, it felt like after he came back into the guild, he learned, like, to get over his past and to try to become a hero. It was like a great potential growth moment, but then he just died later on anyways. But it also, like, with Kama saying that powerful speech to get Rylan back into the guild, it also sort of cemented for me, like, oh yeah, this is why Kama's the leader, because, like, he knows what to say. You know, he doesn't just favor Celty or Enoch. He doesn't play favorites like that. He's being fair. He's like, this is why he's the leader of the Shadow Slayers. It sort of made Kama seem like a bit of a better character, rather than just, you know, an angry old man. Made him seem a bit wise that moment. Also just because, I don't know, I just like the drama that Rylan caused. It was just fun to read. And he could have grown so much as a character if he survived that Tairaga fight. But as soon as he decides to be heroic, he dies to Tairaga. That actually, in hindsight, actually is pretty great as well, because it makes you hate Tairaga more. For killing off of a guy who is, you know, who everyone fought so hard to keep in the guild. That's what I have to say about Rylan. Now on to Odessa. Funny thing about Odessa is that I didn't notice how many people were ignoring her character until Shadow Slayers came along. And I'm like, wow, like, Demi really got the short end of the stick when it came to Shadow Slayers. Odessa just had bad luck. Like, I like all of the Shadow Slayers members a lot. Like, I think about these characters all the time. So I have something positive to say about all of them, even Odessa, who was unlucky and didn't get a lot of attention. I still like her because, for one, just her variety of spells. When I saw that she was just a general mage, I actually thought it was like good, because I feel like for a role playing game, if you have a lot of different abilities, you can sort of have fun mixing and mashing them together and using, this spell for this scenario and this spell for that scenario. And I was like, Odessa's never get boring. She's always going to be fun to fight because she has so many spells. I thought that was a good thing. I liked how her spells weren't always just like elements. She had like the blinding spell, and she had like minor healing spell. But it's good that it wasn't major healing. That was a good part of her character. The fact she wasn't also like a pro healer. Also, just like her bratty character, it was kind of amusing, kind of, I don't know, kind of likable. She wasn't bratty in like an annoying way. When it comes to like standout moments for Odessa, unfortunately I can't really think of one off the top of my head, but she didn't really, like, Nemi didn't really post all that much, and she left like early on in the role playing game, so she didn't really have a lot of opportunity to have like, a powerful dramatic moment. But I still feel like despite that, she managed to be better than the average role playing character in the few posts that she did make. She still, had a clarified weakness. She still had an interesting character design. She still had some clear. I don't know where I'm going with this. Just, I like Odessa. I like all of the Shadow Slayers. Even though Odessa didn't get a lot of posts. She was a cool mage. So, now on to Enoch. Enoch made a very good first impression for me. Like, as soon as I saw Enoch, I was super excited that Arena joined Shadow Slayers, because, like, I'm so into Terra Lucis because it's the medieval fantasy action that I'm so into. And I was like, man, Arena would be a great role player for this kind of game because she's so into this medieval fantasy action style. And then she joined, and I was like so excited. And also because I don't do that many things with Arena, it was just super exciting to have her join the game. And Enoch formed great impression at first, not just because of that, but because he was the first support role character, and not even a conventional support role. Like, his moveset was time related, like he could speed people up and he could freeze time. He also had a barrier move, and he was an illusionist, so he was a support role that made it possible for him to sort of make sure that no one gets hit and make it so that his teammates can attack swiftly. And like, I was like, oh man, that's such an interesting moveset. It's like, it's not the conventional like fireball shooter. It's like, it was a creative approach, and it almost seems crazy to choose a support role in a role-playing game, because you gotta have a lot of faith in the other role players to choose that role, because you'll never get the spotlight really as, well, you can, but like, you'll never get the finishing blow as a support character, except for Rezza apparently. But like, yeah, it was just such an interesting choice, and the fact that Enoch was an Archex follower was also such an interesting choice, because like, the normal thing to do is to be a Yakoshi follower, to praise Yakoshi as the holy god instead of Archex, the neutral god, because generally, pretty much everyone in the world of Kama the Thief praises Yakoshi as their god, and Hikaku was the only character ever to choose Archex. He's the only guy on the planet, or established at least, on the whole planet, to praise Archex as his god, and so for someone else to choose Archex is like, whoa, that's unconventional. Just, the priests show an appreciation for the world that I've built because they praise the god of seas that I made up. So I always like that. Enoch's personality was mature. All the Shadow Slayers respected Enoch as well as all the role players. It's something that I liked about his character. I feel like he actually could have made a better leader for the Shadow Slayers than Kama, because the characters liked him more than they liked Kama. And he just generally seems more like, reserved and calm and smart. He seems like he'd just make a better leader in general. But I also like that he was a huge nerd. Like, every time someone would ask him about anything, he'd go on a whole rant about, like, his adventures across the world and all the different fascinating things that he's seen. He liked to talk about the plants with Pinky. He's not the most simple character. It's a little bit hard for me to describe exactly what he's like, but that's what made him a good character. Sorry, reading it. The Enoch segment is slow. Since Enoch was a support role, he didn't really get an opportunity, at least from a combat standpoint, to get a standout moment. But, I mean, he always had, like, great posts, really. He was a favorite among the characters in Shadow Slayers. So, moving on to Nicolas. Nicolas was just a likable guy. Like, right off the bat, I already liked him. Like, as soon as the first post came in, his clumsiness, and he's, like, a bit awkward, and he's, like, sort of just a nice, normal kid. Despite him being so normal, he was still, like, very likable. But, unfortunately, there's not a lot to say about Nicolas, because he didn't post as much as the other Shadow Slayers. Like, Nicolas was actually, like, infamous for being the guy who just shows up every now and then because Constantina can't keep up with the insane fast pace of Shadow Slayers. Like, I made it so that Nicolas and Gaynor fought the regular Fearens during the Tairaga fight. Someone's like, the inactive people are fighting the regular Fearens. The inactive squad. One of the most, like, commonly referenced Nicolas scenes is the scene where it's like a scene built literally to excuse Nicolas's inactivity. Like, there's a whole bunch of drama going down within the Shadow Slayers, and then the excuse for why Nicolas didn't do anything through all of that, like, the real reason is because, the role player wasn't posting, but the role player posted that Nicolas wasn't involved in all that drama because he couldn't open a door. He was, like, banging on the door that whole time. And, like, it was just, like, really dramatic, like, oh no, I'm gonna die in here because I can't open this door. It was really funny. So Nicolas is known for the infamous door scene, and infamously being inactive, even though Nicolas wasn't actually the most inactive. But I guess it's a combination of Nicolas being inactive and sticking around throughout the whole story. I feel like Nicolas, because he's, like, kind of not weird, but is still likable, could have made, like, a good main character for, like, a side series. Like, you could have a Shadow Slayers sequel where Nicolas is the main character. That could have been neat. And I also like that he was a blacksmith. It's like a sort of needed role in a medieval fantasy guild. And his abilities were cool as well. So now on to Gaynor. First thing to note about Gaynor is that she is a badass. She looks super badass. She acts super badass. She is, like, the king of badass among the Shadow Slayers. She is, like, badass mom, the character. She almost looks like if Corey were to make an edgy Mary Sue, it would look like Gaynor. Because Gaynor weirdly looks like Corey's persona. Like, I'm pretty sure it wasn't intentional, but it just turned out that way. Despite Gaynor looking kind of edgy because of the battle scar and the general badassery looked, I still really like the character design along with the character. And her being a fire mage sort of worked toward... Well, it would have worked for the end of Shadow Slayers that I had planned where everyone would team up for one big fire attack, but she died. The character, not the creator. Yeah, and one nice thing about Gaynor is that, like, she immediately formed a bond with Celty because Gaynor and Celty were both, like, the moms of the guild. Just the only difference is Gaynor's children are dead, while one of Celty's is still alive, or Celty's only child. Manasa also had a child, I believe, but Manasa does not end up being Celty's friend by the end of everything, or at least she doesn't end up as close with Celty as Gaynor did. And so, like, it was kind of unfortunate that Gaynor died, because Gaynor is, like, the only one who would have supported Celty when all the drama went down, but nope, Gaynor wasn't there. Everything just sucks for Celty. And the way in which Gaynor died was, like, really unexpected. It was just like Corey just stopped posting all of a sudden, And then at the end of the role-playing game, it's like, oh, by the way, Gaynor died like a month ago. And it's like, well, why didn't none of the characters mention Gaynor die if she died? Why didn't any of them see her die? It was like kind of weird that it was inserted later that she died a long time ago, like mid-fight. And so if I were to ever make a Shadowslayers adaptation, I'd probably give her a death scene where Tairaga kills her, because I had this one cool scene in mind, or maybe you could call it cool, I don't know, but this one scene in mind where Gaynor like tries to attack Tairaga, and then Tairaga uses an illusion to disguise himself as like one of Gaynor's kids, and like make the illusion that Gaynor's like back home and none of the apocalypse happened, and like Tairaga pretending to be Gaynor's kid would say, "Mommy, stop," and like this sort of, Gaynor would instinctually stop because she's like, "Wait, what's going on here? Like, was that whole Fearen apocalypse nightmare real? Or am I about to attack my kid? Like, what's going on?" And so like, and then Tairaga would kill her while she's like, all sobbing over seeing her kids again. Oh man, now I'm saying that, it's making me feel bad. But this would be like, that'd be such a messed up scene, and that would have really cemented Tairaga as like such an evil, twisted guy. It would have been, oh man, now that I say that out loud, I wish that happened. I wish that's how Gaynor died, but still, Gaynor's contribution nonetheless was neat. Gaynor the badass. So now on to Celty. How fitting, since I was mentioning Celty so much in the Gaynor rant. Celty is like, I feel like I could talk about her the most, just because she presented such an interesting, like, moral gray area kind of conflict. Like, Celty really made shit hit the fan. One thing that I'm glad about when it comes to Celty is that she sort of helped make Tairaga more relevant by having her make a Fearen baby by banging a Fearen and having that Fearen be Tairaga. It made it so that Tairaga was sort of relevant from the beginning of the story. So that's one thing that I liked. And also another thing that I liked is that whenever a lot of times when Celty and Oxy would cause drama, like, that in itself would get people to post a lot and would keep things exciting. And it's almost like Castrol, by creating so much conflict with her character, was sort of hosting the role-playing game for me. It made things so much easier for me. Like, once Celty and Oxy would like cause drama, I didn't have to post anymore. I didn't have to keep people excited. The drama that Celty caused kept people excited. So like, I was super glad that Celty brought that to the Shadowslayers, and she really, the conflict that she caused, like, did so much for the character development of the other characters. Like, the sad moment when like the guild starts falling apart because they all disagree on what they should do with Celty, sort of helped all those characters to grow a lot. Kama had his moment of giving the headband and the dagger to Osseus and Mimisko, and Enoch had his moment of talking to Fallen, and it allowed Zerah and Osseus to bond when they went outside and talk to each other. So like, Celty, I feel like by making Celty, Castrol almost got the short end of the stick. She was like, I don't want to play Celty ever again, because none of the characters like Celty. But from a narrative standpoint, Celty did a lot for Shadowslayers. That's what makes her great. Now on to Alroth of Alterac, or Pinky, but I'm going to call them Alroth. So my initial impression of Alroth looked super duper cool. Like, I really like big, powerful characters. So right off the bat, like, from a design standpoint, Alroth was right down my alley. And not only did he look like a cool armored suit, but he was also such a creative and mysterious character. The fact that he had like such a high-pitched voice and wouldn't move when he laughed. Like, that sort of mystery as to what or who Alroth was sort of made the initial introduction, the initial beginning of Shadowslayers so much more fun. The idea that like Alroth is actually like a pixie piloting a giant suit of armor using plant magic is like, that's awesome. That's just, it's just awesome. Like, man, that is my favorite. That was one of my favorite character concept ideas I've ever heard of. Like, it's creative beyond anything I would have expected from any role playing game. And that made Alroth so interesting from a character standpoint, because, like, when Tairaga looked directly into the helmet, he was like, why can't I read your mind? Like, your head should be right there. Why can't I see anything? And, like, the fact that Alroth was, like, essentially invincible, unless you killed the pixie inside, it allowed Alroth to be one hell of a tank, one hell of a badass tank at that. So I just loved the concept behind the character. And Alroth really, like, had their moment to shine when they climbed up Fearos. Like, initially, I just had Fearos fall over because Rylan just kind of, like, knocked him down by shooting his own beam back at him with the help of Manasa. Maybe some other characters. I'm not sure if I quite remember. Well, everyone sort of contributed in some way to that. But anyways, and I was just going to have Fearos defeated right there. They just, like, beat Fearos while he's down. But Evan was like, oh, I was really hoping for, like, Shadow of the Colossus moment where our characters would, like, climb up Fearos. It's like, this ended real fast, and, it made Fearos seem a lot less intimidating. And I feel like a lot of people would have been upset by that criticism, but I was like, Evan, you're onto something. Like, that's a great idea. So I had Fearos get back up, and that caused the panic once again, and that made Fearos seem really tough. He doesn't just get knocked out once and they just beat him right away. He gets back up and keeps attacking. And so Alroth got to have this really cool moment where he's, like, scaling up Fearos as he gets back up, and, like, helps Alroth get up there, and Alroth, like, deals this super cool dramatic blow to the head to finish it off. And I just love that so much. Like, oh man, that one of the highlights for me for Shadowslayers. I'm really glad Evan made that, like, said that he wanted that moment of, like, climbing up the giant monster and hitting its weak point, after the big climbing struggle. Yeah. And also, another Alroth moment that I really liked was when he was fighting Valdus. Because throughout the role-playing game, like, all I've really been praising Alroth for so far is from, like, a combat and creativity standpoint. And personality-wise, Alroth is the meanest character in the Shadowslayers. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if Alroth was someone's least favorite simply because he's such a mean guy. Or he at least comes off as a mean guy, but, like, all of his complaints make sense. He's not just mean because of anger issues like Kama, or mean for the sake of being mean like Tairaga, who's just a total sadist. But Alroth was, like, logical but harsh. But Alroth's sort of personality sort of shined when he was up against Valdus and all the Fearens pile onto him, because, like, Alroth sort of just charged in by himself, and his sort of, like, his selfishness sort of became karma, his unwillingness to work as a team ended up resulting in that. And I thought that was, like, really good writing. I don't know if Pinky really learned anything from that necessarily, learned to be a team player from that, but I don't mind. I still really enjoyed that post of, like, all the Fearens piling on to Alroth because he refuses to work as a team. And it's also, like, during that post, or maybe a post before that, like, because Alroth is not quite as goody two-shoes as the other Shadowslayers members, he was, like, as he was fighting Valdus, because Valdus tried to make the argument that what he was doing was right, and since Alroth is not quite as goody two-shoes, he was like, maybe Valdus is right, because Alroth likes to think from a logical standpoint. It's like, maybe this would make the world better, and I'm really glad that Alroth sort of had that moment where you really got to see, like, how he's different from the other Shadowslayers, how his moral code is a bit different from them. But in the end, he decided, I'm going to fight Valdus, I'm going to take him down, because no human should be given the powers of a god. It's, he's just human, so he has to be stopped. So yeah, there was a lot that I liked about Alroth. But now I'm going to move on to Gremlon, because I can't have this rant go on forever. Gremlon, like Alroth, was also a really creative character idea. Like, I'm glad that someone didn't go for a human or an elf. Gremlon is just completely not human looking. He is a red goblin, so he really helps to cement the diversity in the medieval fantasy theme of the role-playing game. But he wasn't just, like, even just a goblin by itself would have been cool, but he was also like a goblin with a weird mask and skeleton hands and necromancy powers. Like, he was crazy out there, and his personality was also like really out there with him. Like, he always has to tell the truth. that made for a lot of comedic moments, and he like has really wacky ways of combining all of his attacks. So Gremlon just stood out as like one of the wackiest, most creative characters in the whole roleplay. And he also, his character arc worked really well with Urzel, which is something that I liked a lot. It helped to involve Vriska and make Vriska's character important to the roleplay. Urzel kind of just died right away, but Gremlon formed a bond with her within the short time that she was relevant. And that kind of worked out favorably for Gremlon, because he got to have this really cool moment where he was like, he referred to Urzel as Big Goblin. He was like, I'm going to avenge Big Goblin. I'm going to, kill them all. And he goes crazy. And a lot of his character arc from that point on is about avenging Urzel. The Big Goblin that he barely got to know, but that he felt like he had a connection with. He also had a pretty cool moment against Necrosis, where he figured out how to beat Necrosis and worked with Rezza to do that. He had his like cool scarf that he put on and all that. So yeah, I liked the comedy and the creativity that Gremlon brought into Shadowslayers. Now on to Altheron. No, this rant is so long. No. Okay. So the first thing about Altheron that I feel the need to mention, I'm always going to start with the elephant in the room when it comes to these things. Altheron was weird. He was the weird guy. He didn't understand personal space. He was crazy. He was he didn't seem to understand common sense. Like, he didn't know what a church was, and he'd just say church to himself in like a creepy way over and over again to figure out the word. What's funny is that, like, Altheron, the reason why he was so weird at first is because he was supposed to be like a joke character. Ourblade wasn't actually intending to take Shadowslayer super seriously. But as, like, after the Fearos fight, Ourblade got super into the style and the intensity of the Shadowslayer's combat and story, that Ourblade sent me a Skype message being like, Altheron was just kind of a joke character at first. I wasn't taking this role-playing game seriously, to be honest, but I'm really impressed. Altheron also, even after that, Altheron still stayed like a funny character, and actually a lot of Altheron's funniest moments, in my opinion, were after the Fearos fight. One of them where Altheron just shouts loud enough for everyone to hear, Enoch is a man? Like, being surprised that Enoch is a man. Because Enoch looks girly. Like, Enoch's got like the long hair and the not really like masculine outfit necessarily, so that created for a really funny moment. And also that scene where Altheron came out of the shower without any clothes because Altheron doesn't understand, or was it that Altheron didn't understand that it was normal to wear clothes, or was it more so that Altheron just couldn't find clothes and like wasn't that embarrassed by being naked around everyone? But still, that was crazy and that was funny. There was one moment with Altheron that I really liked, and I appreciated so much that Ourblade tried to collaborate with me to make Altheron relevant to the story, rather than doing what the Kill Satellite did and try to like ruin my story and make it about his character. Altheron collaborated with me to create this scene where Tairaga tries to read Altheron's mind, and then like something crazy happens. His head starts hurting and he starts seeing all these crazy images. Tairaga doesn't understand why when he tries to read Altheron's mind, his head just goes haywire. and that was supposed to sort of foreshadow that there's, why can't Tairaga read Alroth's, not Alroth, Altheron. Have I been saying Alroth this whole time? I'm talking about Altheron here. Tairaga tried to read Altheron's mind, and he reacted so unusually. I thought that was a really cool, result of that. I also like how Altheron could, when Sandor was about to be summoned, as I described, there were all these screaming spirits that they could hear in the distance, but because Altheron is very connected to the spirit world, and is the spirit guy, essentially, he could hear these spirits, they were, blasting into his ears, and hearing these sounds were making him miserable, because he's so connected to spirits, that, he would, the fear of, the spirits that sort of were haunting Valdus's body, the lingering spirits that Sandor, the billions of spirits that Sandor had killed, sort of their presence being there, bothering Altheron so much was, really sort of clever. It's, something that would only happen to Altheron, and, I thought it was really, really good idea from Ouro Blade's behalf to make that happen. It was a moment that I appreciated, and it sort of helped to hype up Sandor. I always appreciate something that helps to make my role-playing game better. I like how Altheron was sort of integrated into the story, into the Tairaga scene, and into the Sandor sounding scene. And Altheron, he was just a fun side character to have. He was also, I feel like he was a fan favorite, especially in the beginning. Just people won't stop talking about Altheron. Altheron's name in Shadowsprayers was all the rage, because that's what Altheron was. He was all the rage. So, now on to the Galystris part of the rant. Galystris was also a badass, like Gaynor. Although, what's funny is that, Galystris started cementing herself as a badass after Gaynor died, because in the beginning, Galystris just wasn't there throughout a lot of the beginning, and then, surprisingly, Emily just started being really active in the roleplay later on. I don't know what caused that to happen exactly, but Galystris was she came off as one of the strongest members of the Shadowslayers, because unlike a lot of the other members of the Shadowslayers who would sort of just cry and fail to defeat regular Fearen, Galystris would just go straight for the bosses and keep piling attacks on them, just one attack over another. She shoots an icicle, she shoots another icicle, and that made her really powerful and intimidating. And she was also very stoic, and that sort of played into the more emotionless she is, the stronger her ice magic is. So that sort of, her being strong and stoic sort of just made her a really badass character. Yeah, and also a funny moment for Galystris is when Galystris breathed. I just love referencing that. Just because Emily didn't know what to post. She's just let's just breathe, and that was just the whole post. She had that moment where she beat Vasabon by herself, because I wanted to hurry up the Vasabon fight already. Luair and Fallen were taking forever to attack, and Galystris just kept attacking Vasabon over and over and over again, and I was well, I gotta make this end eventually, so Galystris gets the kill by herself. It was the same with Valdus, where she was, besides Kama, Pinky was kind of occupied. Pinky / Alroth was kind of occupied by the wave of Fearens, regular Fearens, so it was mostly just Kama and Galystris just piling on attacks onto Valdus over and over again. And Galystris did a ton of damage to Valdus because, Emily did what role player was supposed to do, just keep attacking. And she got a lot of badass, fighting moments because of that. She was the only one to beat a legendary Fearen on her own. So, next is Ooro. Norimo. What's funny is that Norimo was not part of the fanime community at all, unlike these other role players. Norma just kind of heard about Shadowslayers, I think through Kisaka, and she was, all these fanimators were doing it, and so Norma was just sure. Oh wait, no, I think she was part of the fanime community, but she kind of left, and then she just came back because of Shadow Slayers. Maybe. I'm not sure. I'm going to feel stupid by the end of this rant. I already felt stupid about a lot of things that I said, but whatever. So Norma joining was like probably the most unexpected person, but I'm glad that Norma did join because right off the bat, the most obvious thing about Ooro is that she was super well written. Like, the wording in every Ooro post would be top notch, and Uro's character was like a very fun and wacky, but at the same time well developed character. Like, she didn't feel cliche. She felt very interesting, and she also presented like a lot of mystery. Like, oh, why is she like kind of look like an elf, but kind of look like a werewolf at the same time? That was sort of a mystery, and her character also had really great foreshadowing, I noticed. I reread Shadow Slayers, and there are hints at what her backstory is before her full backstory is actually revealed throughout the beginning of the role-playing game. And I found that super impressive, further cementing that Norma is just like really good at writing. Ooro was a very like weird but very friendly character, so her character got along with all the Shadow Slayers, and Ooro as well was a fan favorite. She was called the mom character even though she wasn't actually a mom like some of the actual mom characters. And Uro's backstory was, I think, literally the longest post, and it wasn't even one post, just one portion of Uro's backstory was the longest post in the whole role-playing game. There was so much text to that Ooro backstory. I kind of didn't want to read it, but I decided to read it because it like caught my curiosity. Like, what is all of this? Like, why does this backstory take so long to explain? But it was such a long backstory because it was a fully fleshed out backstory. You really got a sense of who Ooro knew in her past and like why she is the way she is. It was like really well written. I think that's all I really had to say about Ooro. So on to Osseus next. Nothing like abundantly obnoxious about Osseus to say like right off the bat. There's no elephant in the room for this. But I really started to notice Osseus after the Tairaga, or at the beginning of the Tairaga fight, because right off the bat, because Tairaga started shit talking about elves, Osseus started shit talking about Tairaga, and he really like did not hold back on the shit talking. Like, it was full on, super immature, super offensive, just blatantly. Like, it's weird to see that in like a medieval fantasy role playing game. He's talking about Tairaga's dick size, and I'm like, whoa, okay, not the kind of insult I would have expected. But yeah, that sort of caused Tairaga to not like Osseus so much. And then, like, Tairaga decided to go after Osseus because of that. And then I decided to... Because I didn't want, like, Osseus to be keeping up with Tairaga on his own, because that would have made Tairaga seem weaker than I wanted him to be. So I decided to have Kama help Osseus with the fight against Tairaga. And I decided to, like, emphasize how Osseus and Kama sort of work as a duo, because they're both rogues that are very speed-oriented. So, like, Kama came up with this strategy of just, like, just keep running around, hitting him from all sides, just keep him at bay until, like, the rest of the team can deal with, like, the rest of these Fearens and the legendary Fearens, and, form a strategy. Osseus and Kama really had this, like, cool duo moment where they're just, like, running around Tairaga like maniacs, driving him crazy, attacking him from all angles, getting speed-ups from both Manasa and Enoch. And that's sort of what lifted off Osseus' association with Kama, because that scene made it so clear that, like, Osseus and Kama had a lot in common. I feel like Ali decided to make Osseus, like, emphasize him looking up to Kama a lot. He started hanging out with Kama a lot. Him looking up to Kama and, having a lot in common with him, hang out with him a lot sort of made the scene where Kama gives Osseus the dagger all the more impactful. Osseus had like really good relationships with other characters. Like as I mentioned, Kama. There's also Zerah, where like Osseus is really, besides Manasa, I guess? I don't really remember if Manasa did like anything for Zerah, but Osseus really like was Zerah's bro in a way. After Celty sort of caused all the drama, Osseus sort of understood where Zerah was coming from and was sort of like, don't worry, Zerah, I like you. And that sort of helped Osseus to be even more likable than he already was. His relationship with Luair is also like really perfect because when Luair came in, it's just like, oh, this is a kid elf. Osseus is also a kid elf, and like they're both good guys, you know. So them as a pairing works super well, and so Osseus sort of, I believe he like had a crush on Luair right away, as soon as they first saw each other, and it sort of created for a lot of funny moments. Okay, now on to the Manasa part of the rant. Manasa right off the bat was sort of stood out to me right away. Kind of an interesting character choice. She was a Vishkanyan, which was like a fantasy race that I had never even heard of, and I looked it up and I was like, oh, this is like a unique choice, like almost like kind of like a snake person. And her being like, I believe she was covered in snails and her blood was made of poison, sort of worked into her whole snake theme. She praised like a snake god. And Naga as a god actually it worked for Shadowslayers, because Shadowslayers wasn't the first game where I had gods besides Sandor, Yokoshi, and Archik, so I had no problem throwing Naga in there as like one of the gods. Manasa also chose like, Manasa didn't choose. Rani chose an interesting role for Manasa. Manasa was a support role that didn't heal, similar to Enoch, but Manasa didn't just use speed and illusions. She kind of like, she had buffs for every like main stat that you would want. So like, you know, she could give someone more magic or stronger magic, and she could make someone's physical attacks do more damage. She could increase someone's defense and all that. So she was quite useful because her support abilities were flexible. So from a combat standpoint, she's pretty great. And she was just like a nice person who got along with a lot of the characters. So from a character dynamic standpoint, she's also pretty great. She had her moment where she cheered Rezza after Celty caused a lot of drama. Wow, I'm coming back to that Celty moment a lot. I mean, it's quite a moment for the characters from a character development standpoint. But yeah, Vriska really loved that scene where Manasa was supportive of Rezza. And it showed just like, you know, how passionate Manasa is for being a nurturing person, I guess. That was a pretty great moment for Manasa. And I think my personal favorite Manasa moment, which I don't think this would be a common opinion, but like in the fight against Sandor, when the huge mountain was about to crush them all, like I kind of worried that like, since certain role players weren't making their characters run away from the mountain, I was like, how are these characters going to survive this? And then Manasa did this dance, this magic dance that caused everyone temporary invincibility. It was like overpowered, but it was called for in the situation because the villain was even way more overpowered than Manasa was. So like, you know, I was like, thank God Manasa had this like ability. Like, it was such a cool moment that like, you know, the support character saved everyone. You know, that temporary invincibility saved the whole guild with that badass magic dance. That was a super cool moment in my opinion, and it saved me from having to kill off a ton of characters. I'm glad that Rani like collaborated that moment with me. Okay. Now on to Zerah. Zerah had really cool powers just right off the bat. Just like the gooey hands and the mask transformation just looked so cool. Like, I was almost kind of jealous. I was like, man, I wish I could create a villain that looked cool. I wish Fearos looked that cool. I mean, Fearos looked intimidating in his own way, so I don't regret his design, but like, man, it's just the mask thing looked so fucking cool. And like Zerah, he didn't make a good reputation with the characters at first, or ever really. Zerah argued with the Shadowslayers a lot. He didn't get along with like most of them, but I mean, I like conflict. I like chaos, so you know that works out for me. Uh, Zerah's still one moment that I really like. It was like a small moment. I wouldn't say this was Zerah's highlight necessarily, but how when Zerah saw like the black goo coming out of Valdus's eyes and his mouth, Zerah was like, "Oh, is that like God's blood? Like, it's black ooze falling out. It's similar to what I've got going on." I was like, "Oh, that's such a cool parallel." Like, I didn't even notice that because I came up with this black goo thing like before knowing about Zerah, but that just worked out so well, and like it would make perfect sense if Valdus was spouting out God's blood because he was about to be with God in that scene. So that was just really cool. And also Zerah, I feel like Zerah's coolest moment was against Sandor. Like the damage he piled onto Sandor was crazy. He was the only one who's managed to scratch Sandor, and he was like, "Oh look, the false god, I scratched him." And like later on in the fight against Sandor, he just like got this super crazy transformation, started just like beating on him like crazy over and over and over again. Like in that final fight, Zerah made huge contribution. Like man, Zerah was fucking savage. So on to Luair. Luair, well, was the cute member of the group. That's the elephant of the room when it comes to her. Like, I noticed upon looking at the pictures that she had like a lot of cute moments with Mimisko, like, because Mimisko was the other like cutesy character of the guild. Uh, as I mentioned earlier when talking about Osseus, she just happened to make the perfect pairing for Osseus. So she had a lot of like funny, lighthearted moments with Osseus. Uh, I liked that she was an archer. Fallen was already an archer, but like there's so many role players that it's nice to have two of each role in case one of them becomes inactive or leaves the game, and like in case you want to split the teams up or something. So like Luair being an archer was neat. Luair's backstory being tied into Tairaga as well was also something that I liked a lot. It helped to cement how evil Tairaga was even further. Um, Okay, so now we get into the part where I talk about the character Rezza. So the elephant in the room when it comes to Rezza that a lot of people mention is that he is the healer. He is the main healer. There are other characters who could kind of heal, like Ooro had medical knowledge, and Odessa had like a minor healing spell. But really, like Rezza was the healer of the team. He didn't have any fighting abilities. He was just completely dedicated to healing, which is something that the team really needed because like the Shadowslayers will always get so beat up, and like Ooro, who pretty much did nearly all of the healing, was not enough to like heal off all of these injuries that the Shadowslayers received. So as soon as Rezza came in, he was the much needed healer of the team. Um, I liked that he wasn't like a stereotypical girly like, oh, I just want to help people, I want to heal people because I'm nice and I'm a healer. He was sort of like the opposite. He was like this grumpy guy who was like, you guys stop getting yourselves injured, and you like and he got annoyed whenever he had to heal anyone. That was kind of funny. And also there was a lot of jokes about him being short, which were also funny. Uh, One moment that I liked about Rezza a lot is when he defeated Necrosis. It was kind of cool that trying to hit Necrosis only made him stronger. So if you try to sort of like heal him, then that would defeat him. So like even though Rezza was the healer, he got to have his moment by defeating Necrosis uh, for the Tairaga fight. Another thing that I really appreciated about Rezza is that out of all of the characters who had artwork in their post, Rezza had the most artwork, I think by a long shot. Like, Vriska was very dedicated to the role playing game and made so many pictures for Shadow Slayers. Like, pictures of Rezza were in nearly every single Rezza post, and I always really loved seeing all those pictures. And just the sheer dedication to Shadow Slayers was something that I super duper appreciated. And last but not least, the most important and the most badass character is Vasa. Vasa's the best. All your characters suck compared to Vasa. Get good, scrubs.
Oh, my voice is dying. Okay, we're almost at the end, the last part of the rant. Now I will go into my thoughts on the final fight of Shadow Slayers. The final fight of Shadow Slayers is the craziest, riskiest thing I've ever done in a role-playing game, because rather than having regular Fearens to let people fight whoever they want, I decided to deprive people of the regular Fearens and force everyone to fight Sandor, because I want Sandor to come off as a one-man army. I want him to be taking on everyone and just wiping the floor with everyone. And I love that I have this one moment in every role-playing game where the villain is so powerful that one of the role players is just this isn't fun anymore. And that might sound like a really bad thing, and maybe it is sort of a bad thing, but in a role-playing game I hosted a long time ago called Last Prophecy, my friend Marcus was there are characters for fighting Archix, and Marcus was this isn't fun anymore, this character's too powerful, we can't even scratch him. And the same happened to Sandor and Shadow Slayers, where Shiv was just this isn't fun anymore. Sandor's too strong, we can't hurt him. But that helped make this final fight feel so hopeless and so chaotic that it was really memorable. I feel from a narrative standpoint, it was a good idea to just have everyone try to hit Sandor and have none of them succeed, just to cement how much stronger Sandor was than every other enemy they had faced up to that point. And then the other two gods showed up to help the Shadow Slayers, and I found the role players' reaction to the other two gods showing up to be really funny. Enoch especially freaked out after seeing Archix, because he praises Archix so hard. And yeah, I had never gotten that kind of reaction from the god character introductions before. But then the fight continued, and another crazy decision was to let people make their characters insanely overpowered and give them god powers to make this fight even more ridiculous. And then there came the final blow. Sandor deprived them of nearly all of their god powers, but they still had a little bit of god power left. So they all... It helped to... the final attack helped to make everyone work together. Kama told everyone to work together to do one final attack on Sandor by helping Mimisko deliver that final blow. And since my characters could use fire, they could all give their fire to Mimisko, and the support roles could power Mimisko, and everyone else could distract Sandor so that Sandor couldn't just kill her while she was loading out that last attack. So everyone was working in unison, and Manasa said finally we're all working together, all for one big attack. The moment that she wanted to deliver what might be, well, what I'm pretty sure is the most large-scale attack in Creative Studio Forum's role-playing history. Once that attack was delivered, and Mimisko had her awesome moment, Shadow Slayers had finally ended. My exhaustion from hosting Shadow Slayers finally paid off. And at that point, I already had the finale of Shadow Slayers ready and typed all out. I just had to copy and paste it. And I didn't warn people that Shadow Slayers would end at that moment. I just ended it because I was so exhausted. Shadow Slayers took so much out of me It's just like, it's time for this to end. And people didn't want it to end, but I felt like it was the right decision because it ended on one hell of a good note. I didn't necessarily feel overjoyed when Shadowslayers was over. I was just tired. I just took a deep breath, and I was like, I couldn't really fully wrap my head around the fact that it was over. This role-playing game that consumed so much of my life. It was such a massive success. It's funny because when Shadowslayers first started, my prediction was that it would die out at 50 pages. After the Fearos fight, during the second break scene, people would just stop posting and that would be the end of it. But Shadowslayers made it all the way up to 165 pages, I believe. And it actually got to the end of the story. I never heard of role-playing games actually concluding. It was like a miracle. Like, oh, we actually like got to the end. This unheard of concept, play-by-post role-playing games tend to go by so slow that they never get to the end of their stories. But this one did. And the funny thing is that, like, looking back on Kill Satellite Guy, essentially tearing me a new one, insulting my role-playing hosting style so much, saying that I'm the worst role-playing host, that I'll never learn and I'll never be successful. And I'm like, well, who's laughing now? Like, I am beyond a successful role-playing host now. I, in many ways, surpassed the person who taught me play-by-post role-playing. It was unbelievable. Yeah. So, I guess, even though my role-playing hosting style was unconventional, even though it went against the grain of providing role players total freedom and, forced people to do this fight then that fight, I stuck with my gut. I stuck with what I was inspired to do. And it shockingly turned out well in the end. So, that's mostly all I have to say about Shadowslayers. My throat, and I am just absolutely exhausted by now. It is dark outside by now, because I've been ranting for so long. Oh. Yeah. Guess I'm done.